All right, so good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you're joining us from, everyone. My name is Jesse, and I am with Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants. If you're joining us for the first time, we're all about bringing conservation, adventure, and science into classrooms around the world. And you know what? I know I work for this program, so I'm hopelessly biased, but it is just so much fun getting to share such amazing scientists, conservationists, and explorers with you guys, either live at home on YouTube or directly in our awesome camera spots. Literally earlier today, we were on the other side of the world from our speakers and viewers today in Ontario and Alberta, all the way in the Seychelles Islands, talking about some amazing conservation work being done in one of the most unique tropical environments on Earth. And now here we are a few hours later going about as far away from that topic as you can possibly be with one of the most unique titles of a broadcast we've ever had, namely 7 Hours, a Rubber Dinghy, and a Shipwreck. We are going to learn about a lost whaling vessel in the remote Arctic in Canada, and Dr. Matthew Ayre is going to take us on a little bit of a tour of how they discovered the shipwreck and the expedition itself. So without further ado, continuing a really exciting series of programs with the Arctic Institute of North America that we've been doing for several months now, and have several more coming up in the months to come, presenting Dr. Matthew Ayre. Thank you so much for joining us, and take us away.
Hey everyone. Okay, so if I share my screen, I hope everyone can see that. So yeah, this presentation is called 7 Hours, a Rubber Dinghy, and a Shipwreck, and you'll see why. And this is about the search for the whaling ship Nova Zembla. But before I tell you about that, I'm going to tell you about my job. Or you're going to listen about my job for just a moment.
Saturday, 29th October. Northeasterly light winds and fine clear weather during the whole of these 24 hours. The strong breezes we have had lately has made not the least visible alteration in the ice. The thermometer this day has risen to 19 above zero, which feels warm to us after experiencing so great degrees of cold the commencement of this month.
Oh, I need to stop.
Saturday, 29th October.
So my job isn't reading old text and voiceovers, but it's reading these old whaling logbooks. Okay? So I spend almost every day going through these old documents and reading entries just like the one you've heard. And I'm reading them to find out the information on the weather and the ice from the Arctic, because these observations were taken in the Arctic in the past, and I can use these to reconstruct what the climate was like. So the Arctic's changing really fast with global warming. The sea ice is melting. You know, it's a real problem, but we need to know what it was like in the past in order to understand what's happening today, and these logbooks can do just that. And so over 100 years ago, between 100 and 300 years ago, we used to send boats up to the Arctic to hunt for the bowhead whale. So the bowhead whale is the largest mammal living in the Arctic. It's the largest animal in general living in the Arctic, and it's the oldest living mammal on the planet. They can live over 200 years old, but we used to hunt them for their blubber, their fat. And we used to render that blubber down into oil, and then we used that oil to light street lamps, to treat fabric, to make soap. It's kind of crazy. We don't do that anymore, which is good. But what was left were these logbooks. So I go through them and I can map the sea ice and what the weather was doing. So I do that every day. And then a couple of years ago, I was going through the logbook of a ship called the Diana from Scotland in 1902, so 118 years ago, and I read this entry. It says, moderate breezes, southeast snowing. One of the Nova Zembla's boats came alongside and reported to us that the Nova Zembla was ashore a little to the southward and that the water was up to the 'tween decks. The Nova Zembla is another Scottish whaler, okay, from the same port as Diana. They both sailed out of a port called Dundee. But this entry tells us that the Nova Zemblas ran aground and the water was up to the 'tween decks. That's the middle decks. And that, I got pretty interested in that. I was like, oh, there's been a shipwreck. That's kind of cool. So I started doing some research into the Nova Zembla. What kind of ship was this? Where did it come from? Where was it built? You know, who sank it? And I found this painting from 1884. So this is the Nova Zembla, and you can see the little boats at the bottom there. This is the crew going out to hunt the whales. It was a fairly gruesome business. Okay. But it's a pretty big ship. This is called a bark rig steam sailor. So it had a steam engine, but it also had 3 masts, big square sails. It was a big ship. It was 143 feet long. And it was sank by a captain called Captain John Cooney. But this was his first time being captain, and he sank the ship. So then a year later, in 1903, the company that owned Nova Zembla bought the Vega, which was Nova Zembla's sister ship. They were built at the same time. Vega was pretty famous already because it was the first ship to go through the Northeast Passage. So that's sailing over Europe, over Russia, and down into the Pacific. And guess what he does in 1903? He sinks the Vega. So then they buy him another ship called the Windward. Again, the Windward's really famous. It was used in expeditions on Russia. It was the ship that brought Nansen back from his Fram expedition when they drifted through the ice. It was also used by Robert Peary in his first North Pole expedition. And then after that, it went back to being a whaler, and Captain John Cooney was in charge of it. Guess what he does in 1907? So only another 4 years later, he sinks the Windward. So he was a pretty unlucky guy, Captain Cooney. But this got me pretty interested in, the Nova Zembla and the wreck. So I started doing some more research. And everyone survived on the wreck. Okay, so they were rescued by the Diana and the Eclipse. And they all went back to Dundee, and they were interviewed by newspapers. And these journalists wanted to know, what happened during the wreck, and, was everyone okay? Where were you, etc. And you can go through these newspaper records and pick up clues. So it says they ran ashore on a reef 300 yards off a beach. So now we know they're off a beach. And it says they ran aground a mile to the south of the entrance of the natural harbor they were going for. So now they're a mile to the south of a harbor off a beach. And then we know that the captain ordered the anchors to be dropped because they were the heaviest items on the boat, these big hunks of metal, to try and lighten Nova Zembla, see if she would float off the rocks. That didn't work, though. And then we know the waves were crashing into the ship and the masts fell off. And then we know that they tried to lower one of their boats, their whaling boats, so small boats you saw on the front of that painting. But one got washed away. But eventually, they all got off onto the beach and then round into the harbor and on board the Diana and also another ship called the Eclipse. So through all these clues, myself and my colleague, Dr. Mike Maloney, managed to pinpoint the position on Baffin Island in the Arctic where Nova Zembla ran aground. This position happens to be the most remote point on the east coast of that island, somewhere underneath that red star you see. And it's really hard to get to. It's like 200 kilometers away from the nearest village. Okay, and those villages are pretty hard to get to. But we were pretty confident we knew where it was, and no whaling ships from this era, from this region, exist anymore. They've all either been wrecked or destroyed since whaling ended. So if we found this, it might tell us more about what life was like on board, how these whalers traded with the local Inuit. If we found it, there'd be loads of questions. But to get to this point and to find it is a really difficult thing to do. It's really expensive, and we had no money. But what we did do is persuade a cruise ship, which was going past, to stop off at this location where we thought Nova Zembla was. And they said, yeah, okay, you've got 7 hours, which really isn't a lot of time. Like any work you do in the Arctic, the weather usually gets in the way and stops things happening. But we decided to give it a go. So this is the morning of that first search. This is in August 2018. And as you can see, the weather's not great. You know, it was quite wavy. It was really cold. It's the middle of summer, so all the ice is melted. But we did, you know, we got there and we thought we knew where it was, and then we couldn't find it. And then we spent the next 6.5 hours up from our 7-hour search, going backwards and forwards in the boat on the reef with a sonar, which can look underwater, looking for the wreck, and not really moving about a lot. And within those 6.5 hours, I managed to get hypothermia, which wasn't great. But then in that final 30 minutes, we spotted some wood on the beach. Now, you don't get trees in the Arctic. They don't grow. So any wood on the beach is quite rare. If it's driftwood, it's come a really long way. It's either had to come down from Labrador, which meant it would have to go over to Greenland and up and round and make a really long journey. Or more likely, if it was driftwood, it would have to come from Scandinavia, from Europe, and would have had to cross the Atlantic and go up and round Baffin Bay. So it's very unlikely it was driftwood. But we had a drone. So we flew the drone off the ship, off our little dinghy, over the beach. And when we got over the beach, we took these photos. Now, the drone was meant to have 20 minutes of flight time. But because of the cold Arctic air and how windy it was, we had 4 minutes. It took 1.5 minutes to get from the boat to over the beach. That gave us, you know, a minute to take these photographs, and then we had to get back. And Mike caught the drone from the boat with 3 seconds before it was going to drop out of the sky. So we nearly lost these photos. But what these photos show are clearly parts of an old sailing ship broken up on the beach where we thought Nova Zembla would be. So we were pretty happy about this. You know, this could very well be the wreck of Nova Zembla. You know, you can see the rivets, and you can see even this piece on the left at the top here has paint still on it. So we were pretty excited by this, but we couldn't get on the beach. We didn't have permission to go on the beach at the time, and we couldn't because the waves were too big. So we got as close to the beach as we could with the boat, and then we went out 300 yards, or approximately 300 yards, because that's what these historical newspaper accounts said, that Nova Zembla ran aground 300 yards off a beach. And we had a little ROV, a remotely operated vehicle. So it's like a little submarine we could put under the water. So we went out approximately 300 yards from where we see this wood on the beach, and we put our ROV in the water. And I've stopped it here because we found something. Now, I'm going to give you a minute to try and figure out what we found. Can anyone guess? Okay, and you can tell me at the end, because the next slide, I'm going to show you what we found. But can anyone see anything there that looks like it might come from a ship? And think about the clues that the newspaper reports gave. So the masts fell off, they dropped the anchor, and they lost a whaling boat. So could it be any of those?
If you'd like, Matt, too, I can bring in classes and get them to guess on camera.
Oh, yeah, okay. Let's do that.
Cool, let's do that. So our class in Canada, if you guys have a thought, what do you guys think this might be in the picture?
Clark, go ahead.
It looks like an anchor.
Looks like an anchor, maybe? I like that. Miss Ross's class, what do you guys think?
Go down.
The shiny stuff.
The shiny stuff, so we're looking at the stuff on the left there. That's probably from the ship, okay? Miss Break, I know you're in, but I know your class is sort of in distance. If you have said anything, please go for it.
Yeah, so I have some guesses about an anchor, some gold maybe. They see some shining stuff, but lots of anchors are guesses.
I like it. I like that gold has now been thrown into the mix. We've got some this is getting more exciting by the minute. Joe, what do you think in Wisconsin?
It looks like it's painted, so
Yeah.
probably an anchor.
Yeah, we got this
gold.
coloration. Okay, and then our York school team. Welcome in, guys.
Hi, thank you. I think Oliver has a guess. Go ahead, Oliver.
I think it might be one of the parts, like that was in front of the ship, like where the two sides of the ship are left and right connect together, but in the front.
Nice. Okay, so we've got front of the ship, we've got gold, we've got anchors, we got all over the place. Matt, tell us what's going on.
So I think we got some future underwater archaeologists listening today, because it's an anchor. So I've highlighted, it's not the best photograph, but you see the anchor here, and then when you zoom in on the photo, you see the chain coming off the bottom of the anchor. And just to the right of the anchor, you kind of see a straight line that's the same color as it. We think this is the scour mark where the bottom of the hull actually ran aground and hit the reef. Now, we didn't actually know we found this until 2 days later. Because like I said, I got hypothermia, we were all really cold, and we'd only had 30 minutes left of the search. So as soon as we did this little ROV dive, we went back to the ship and we fell asleep for about 18 hours because we were exhausted. It's amazing what the cold does to you. And it was only about 2 days later that we remembered, oh yeah, we put the ROV in the water. We should have a look at that footage, and found this anchor, which was amazing. We were so lucky. But then we had to go home. That was it. Our 7 hours was up. We're over. So we found evidence that Nova Zembla is there. Or at least we think Nova Zembla is there. But we need to go back. But we're going to have to wait a whole year to go back, because there's only about 6 weeks in August, between August and September, where we can actually safely get to this site, and the weather isn't bad, or the sea ice isn't there. So we had to spend a whole year waiting eagerly to go back. But we did get back in 2019. Okay, and this time we had the proper permits and permission to go on the beach, and the weather was perfect. Okay, so we went on this boat here, this blue vessel. This is called the RV Nulialuk. It's the Nunavut government's fisheries research vessel. So it's a 65-foot converted fishing boat. And we had to go all the way to Pond Inlet, which is an Inuit community at the top of Baffin Island, to meet this boat. And then we had to go motor all the way down to this site in some really big waves. And the weather forecast was terrible. And I was a little bit worried we weren't going to get on the beach. If the waves were like they were in 2018, there was no way we were getting on the beach. But we got there and the weather was completely perfect. So as soon as we got there, we got into the little Zodiac you can see hanging off the back of this boat and went straight to the beach. See if we can find those bits of wood we found on, well, that we photographed with the drone the year before. And we got on the beach and we were blown away, completely amazed. So this is that piece of wood, that big piece of wood we found on the drone photo. And you can see it's got paint on it. It's even got some rope still attached. This is from what's called the bowsprit on the ship, the pointy bit at the very front. But this wasn't the only thing. This beach is about 4 kilometers long, and it is completely covered in shipwreck. We found the masts, which we know fell off from the historical accounts and were washed away. And there's even evidence that these masts have been cut. Because if you imagine all the rigging holding the masts up, when the masts fall down, the rigging's still attached. And it's starting to pull the ship apart. So the crew would have rushed around with saws to cut all this off, to cut them free, to stop the hull breaking apart. Unfortunately, they couldn't save the hull, but this is what they were trying to do. So we find these masts, and then we're walking along the beach, and we find the remains of the whaling boat that was washed away. Smashed up this clinker-built wood, and it still had paint on it. We had no idea that, these boats were so elaborately painted. There's yellow and green on here. We only have the one painting of Nova Zembla which shows white and blue, but that was from 26 years before. And so they definitely could have repainted them, but all the photographs we have are just black and white. So this was amazing to find. And then my favorite find are these beautifully carved pieces of wood. Okay. Now, the image on the left, the small one, I'm not entirely sure which part of the ship that comes from, but we're fairly confident these other two pieces with the leaves and this floral design come from the very front of the ship. Now, ships of this size would have what we call a figurehead. So at the front, and it was often a carving of a person at the front of the boat. But it wasn't always. Sometimes they had, fancy designs and fancy carvings. And Nova Zembla was no different. And the painting proves this. You can see the very front in this gold, this kind of swirly floral design. And then we find the same thing on the beach, but in actual wood. So that was really cool to find. We found oars and paddles from the whaling boats themselves. So we know when they tried to launch one and they lost it. So that one we broke with the green and the yellow paint on the next beach south, we found this oar washed up above the high tide line, and it's been there untouched for 118 years. Amazing. And then we found the hull. Like, how cool is this? This is about a third of the hull. So the ship is completely broken up. It's spread across this whole beach. But here is a big section of hull. It's about 60 foot long, just poking out the ice. Now, we'd love to go back and excavate this. But this trip was merely to document it. So we couldn't touch it and remove any of the sand, but we could certainly photograph it and look at it. Okay. Now, this is the beach. So you see this long beach, and then you see another beach to the south. And this whole beach, even if you look closely on this photo, you can see bits of wood just dotted around all over it. And it's all still here because in the summer months, nobody, not even Inuit hunters, come to this spot. It's so remote. It's so hard to get to by sea, which is why Nova Zembla still exists. Now, we did have a couple of issues getting on this site. So you see this area of flat land behind. This is like a hotspot for polar bears, which can be quite dangerous. And the day before we got there, someone had flown over here in a helicopter and spotted 8 bears. Okay. And apparently there was 2 just hanging back from the beach. Fortunately, we didn't see them. And because the wind was offshore, they couldn't smell us, so they didn't come down to investigate. So that was lucky. So we were very happy with this trip. We got back, we were like, yeah, we found Nova Zembla. And then I went back to my climate work. And I was reading the logbooks. And I found a logbook from 1899. And in it, they were in this area. And the person writing the logbook says, went to visit the wreck of the Eagle, which was ran ashore here in 1896. This is 8 years before Nova Zembla ran aground. Okay. And this was in the fjord that Nova Zembla was trying to get to, so just round the corner from this beach. And while we were here in 2019, we happened to walk a beach called Eagle Beach. And I had no idea why it was called Eagle Beach. And it was because the Eagle, another whaler, had been abandoned here in 1896. But we had we had barely any evidence when we walked this beach. There were some bits of wood, clearly from a ship, but we thought they were from Nova Zembla. And I took some photos on this beach. So this is a newspaper drawing I found of the loss of the Eagle in 1896. And it matches up pretty close with a photograph I took from Eagle Beach. You can see the edge of the hill there. And this is the harbor Nova Zembla was trying to get into. So there's clearly another wreck there. It's clearly been salvaged heavily by Inuit who were living there at the time until 1900, only 2 years before Nova Zembla. So now we want to go back. We want to investigate this wreck. We want to find out who salvaged it. And we think we know who. It's an Inuit gentleman called Olnik, who had traveled to Scotland before, and he lived on that island you can see in this photograph. So we're hoping to go back in 2021, more likely 2022 though. So I will happily take any questions. So this was a photograph taken in Pond Inlet, by the way, just before we met the ship with some friends there.
Fantastic. Thanks so much, Matt, again. What a cool talk. And yeah, just seeing kids in the bottom. We got tons of hands up in the classes already. So what you can do if you want to end your screen share, come back, have a bit of a conversation with us. For our groups joining in Toronto and Stony Plain in Alberta, if you guys want to share questions on YouTube, please do. But what we're going to do to begin is go to Canada, Ontario, to Miss Salinas' class. You guys want to kick us off with a question, just demute your mic, and you'll be good to go. Hi, Miss Salinas' group.
Does anyone have a question? Any questions? Oh, Victoria has a question. You're going to have to speak up. Okay, Victoria? Go ahead. Oh, it's okay. Does anyone else have a question? Okay, we're gonna keep thinking about it.
Cool. We'll come back in a minute, guys. Let's go to Miss Ross's class. If you guys have a question, go for it.
Who funds you to search the beaches for the wrecks?
Yeah.
That is a great and important question. So for both of these expeditions, we got funding from the Arctic Institute of North America, where I work, and the Royal Canadian Geographical Society. But even with that funding, we still needed a lot of help. It's very expensive to go to the Arctic, and we couldn't have done this without the help of our friends. So we were let on board for free by the cruise ship, which was amazing. The Nunavut government gave us their research vessel for a week, which was also amazing. A company called Deep Trekker gave us their ROV to use, also amazing. And then we got equipment from Fjallraven, which is an outdoor clothing company, a Mech as well. And then we had some drone pilots who work for the ETAC Research Centre in Clyde River, which is another community on Baffin Island, further south of the wreck. So yeah, it took lots of people to help us out and do this, which we're very grateful for. So it's a good question.
It's a great question. I think it's the first time we've ever had a student under grade 10 ask that question. So thank you so much to our students in Tavistock. Miss Bray's class, if you want to turn on your camera, demute your mic, I'll come to you guys next. I know you're Miss Nathan's group joining us in Toronto. So come on in and yeah, go for it. Go for it.
So I think right now we're still thinking about some of the questions we might have. So we might just need, I have one right now saying, when did they start their journey?
Yeah.
When did we start?
Yes.
When did the whaler go?
I think you guys personally, Matt. Yeah.
Okay. So we started our journey in 2018 and in 2019 in the middle of August.
Okay.
So in 2019, to get to Pond Inlet, I had to go to Denmark, then to Greenland, then get on a boat for a week, then get off in Pond Inlet.
You know, what I love about this story is that it's like the most cutting edge tech possible to, unveil the mystery of something that is comparatively low tech from the past. You're going to remote regions in a country where people wouldn't expect it to be a remote region. Just it combines so much. There's no gold, however, which maybe in 2022 when you're up there, we can, fit that student's curiosity and find some treasure.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I don't think there'll be any gold. For whalers, the gold was the whale oil. So
okay.
We might find some old greasy bits of wood.
Ooh.
But we do have some clues for 2021. So there's a story. So Robert, who was in the photograph at the end, who's our drone pilot, who lives in Clyde River, he said there's a story of a bell on the island, which is probably the bell from the Eagle.
Ooh. That's pretty exciting. Well, we'll follow up then. We'll do all our classrooms in 2 years. We'll follow up and see if they found the bell. I'm so excited. York School. So we're going to come to you guys because apparently every student in your class has a question. So I'm going to come to you.
Hi, friends. Yes, they're very, very excited to ask you. Friends, I need you to sit down, please. Thank you very much. And Maisie, go ahead with your question.
Hi, Maisie.
Did you find all the parts of the boat?
Did we find all the parts? We didn't find all the parts of the boat. We found lots and lots of parts of the boat. But these boats are made up of thousands and thousands of pieces of wood. And we probably found over 1,000.
Wow.
But a lot of this, some of it could still be underwater that we need to look for. So the heavy metal bits. So there was 2 anchors. We found one of them. There's certainly another one that could be found. And we kind of think we see it on some ROV footage, but it's only when I look at the footage sometimes. So I'm certainly not sure. There's the boilers and the engine, because this had a steam engine that could be under there as well. But lots of this wood could have been washed away. So you get lots of waves there during storms. But also in the winter, the sea totally freezes there. And you get something called ice rafting. So when the sea freezes, but then breaks up again, and you get a storm and the ice starts to move, this ice pushes up onto the beach, but then it comes down again, and that could take bits of the ship with it, and they could float off into the sea, and we don't know where they are.
Very cool question, guys. All right, for Ms. V's students, you guys can't keep your hands down. I promise to come back to you for another question in a minute, but you can save your arms. You can like rest them for a little bit if you'd like. I'm going to go back to Ms. Ross's class, and then I'll come to you, Joe, in a second in Wisconsin. We've got some on YouTube as well. We're just whipping through these guys. This is great. So, Ms. Ross,
has any kids ever gone to the Arctic with you?
Any kids to the Arctic, Matt?
Personally, we have never taken any students to the Arctic with us, but we do work with young people who live in the Arctic already. So we have friends in Pond Inlet who we work with, and there's a big connection between the whaling trade and the Inuit that live on Baffin Island. So people can trace their ancestry back to whalers, and people have things from old whalers. It's pretty cool.
Yeah. One thing I want to stress for our students too, if you are ever keen to go to the Arctic, one of the coolest programs in Canada is called Students on Ice that regularly has Arctic expeditions. So tons of kids get to go, experience it firsthand. I think they're a little bit older than you guys when they go, but you guys should definitely apply, learn more about that. It's an incredible opportunity and a really neat program.
Oh, and Jesse doesn't know this yet because I haven't told him. Oh, surprise. But in February, I have an Inuit friend, Alex, who's going to speak with on Exploring by the Seat of Your Pants from Pond Inlet about what it's like to live in the Arctic. So,
Ooh.
Look out for that one.
We have never had a program from anywhere remotely close to there, so that would be that's very exciting, and thank you for telling me now. See, we should always have surprises like this. This is how you tell me about all the upcoming programs.
Yeah.
Then I'm genuinely shocked. That's great. Thanks, Matt. That's super cool. Well, let's head to Wisconsin, our lone American today. Joe, if you want to share a question with us, go for it. Happy Thanksgiving, by the way.
Thanks. So, what was your favorite part about going on your expeditions?
Yeah.
That's a really good question. That's a really tough question as well.
Yeah.
Like, it's super cool to get to go on these.
Yeah.
You know, I didn't know I could do this as a job. So that bit's kind of cool. But I think my favorite part is probably seeing my friends that live in remote places.
Yeah.
So going to Pond Inlet and hanging out with people is really cool.
It's really, it's so heartening to see whenever we have these programs, how often it's those community interactions, that working with people all around the world, with the friendships that you build from it, like science and exploration allow you that opportunity to interact with people that in basically no other context in life do you get the chance to see as many people and experience as many cultures as you do through jobs like yours. And so, I love that answer. Thank you so much, Matt. Awesome. All right, let's take a few from YouTube, and then we'll go back through all the live classes for some more. So one of our students in Stony Plain wants to know, what sparked your idea to start doing this? We're going to take this back before the individual sentence in the whaling document. Like, why get into this as a field? Like, what was the interest as a kid or a young man or whatever?
So when I was growing up in the northeast of England, my grandmother would drag me along to archaeological digs every year. So I'd go and look at old stuff and go to museums all the time. So I was pretty interested in history. But I also sailed. So I used to go race dinghies and yachts and then surfed for a long time. So I was really interested in the sea. But I did geography at university. So then I got really interested in climate change. And then at the end of university, one of my lecturers said to me, would you like to do a PhD? We need someone to look at historical whaling ship logbooks to look at climate change in the Arctic. So it kind of merged all these interests, maybe not the archaeology then, but then that interest in archaeology, I guess, inspired me to look further when I found this clue about the Nova Zembla.
Super, super cool. By the way, coolest grandma ever. Not many of us have grandmas that are dragging us to archaeological sites. So that's a good family connection to have.
I'm sure I was really bored at the time.
We'll ignore that part of the story. Let's go back to Spruce Grove, Miss Blair's class. So I love this question. So specifically with this ship, why were you so interested in finding the remains of it and researching it? I mean, you maybe haven't come across sentences quite like this in other documents before, so maybe it was just a challenge, but was there something specific about this story that really appealed to you?
Yeah, so there's a little bit missing from this story, because I could talk about it forever. So when I read that 1902 logbook of the Diana and came across the wreck of the Nova Zembla, it was kind of interesting. But I read these logbooks every day and have done for the last 7 years nearly. I come across shipwrecks all the time. You know, that it was a dangerous trade. And, you know, there was lots of shipwrecks. What was really interesting was then that after I finished transcribing all the weather information from the 1902 logbook of the Diana, I moved on to the 1903 logbook of the Diana, which I also happen to have. And in it, they go back to the wreck of Nova Zembla and salvage the rudder and say that Nova Zembla lies on a rocky reef, and a rocky bouldery reef, and that we salvaged the rudder to have a spare rudder for ourselves. And then I was like, oh, they've gone back to it and they can see it and they can access it. Maybe it's still there. And that's kind of what inspired me to look out for this wreck. Whereas most of the wrecks from the British Arctic whaling trade are on the other side of Baffin Bay off northwest Greenland, and they're usually crushed in the ice and then they sink in deep water. So they're much, much harder to find. And I had no intention of actually going to find it. I was just interested in kind of seeing where it was and could I find out where this was. It wasn't until I'd done all that historical research and talked with Mike that we went, maybe we should probably give this a go.
Marine archaeology is it's the coolest thing. And by the way, for our classes that might not know too, there's not too many shipwrecks like this in the whole world to be able to discover so readily. We've covered a few shipwreck programs because they're always so fascinating. One thing a lot of our Canadian classrooms especially should check out is the wrecks of the Erebus and the Terror. So these are iconic shipwrecks. These have been recently found in the Arctic. A really nice follow-up to today's presentation if you're keen. So I'll share some resources on that when we're done.
Terror are the coolest shipwrecks in the Arctic.
Yeah, they're like, we're like 7 minutes left in the broadcast, and I know the two of us could nerd out about this for a long, long time, so we'll spare our classes for now. But Erebus and Terror, I'll put them in a banner before we go too. I want to come to the York School because, again, your arms must be exhausted, guys. Let's go to the York School, Ms. B's class, share a question, and we'll go back through all the others in a second.
Of course. Yes, of course. Thank you. Mia, go ahead, honey.
If you were able to go on the beach bench, were some of the pieces far away? How did you see them if they were far away?
Yeah.
How did I see the pieces if we weren't able to go on the beach the first year?
Yeah.
So I used the binoculars initially. So I was sat in the boat, really cold, and we weren't finding anything in the water. So I thought, you know what? I look on the beach. Maybe I might see a polar bear. That would be kind of cool. So I got my binoculars out and I looked at the beach, and then I saw something that looked like wood. So that's when we put the drone in the air and flew it over the beach. Okay. It's just a really little drone, but they're amazing what you can do with them.
It really is. Again, some of the cutting edge tech on that first expedition is super, super cool. But binoculars is something that we have with a lot of scientists. Again, the Seychelles earlier today, we're talking about binoculars and how useful they are in science. So do check that out. I'm going to, again, put up in the banner on the bottom of the screen the Erebus and Terror wrecks. Do check those out when you get a chance. And what I want to do now is go back to Kanata, Miss Salinas' class. If you guys have another question, just demute your mic, come on up, and then we'll do Ross, Break, and Joe in succession, okay? Perfect.
Okay, we have Zoe that's coming to ask a question.
Hey, Zoe.
Hi.
Hi.
Did you get any money for finding the parts of the shipwreck?
Ooh.
No. No, we don't. We don't get a reward for finding anything. We got some money to go and look, and because we found it the first year, it allowed us to get some money to go back the second year. But we don't get paid for finding it.
That's really a neat question, one we haven't gotten in many of our programs, but most marine archaeology is tied to the country in which it's being undertaken. So it's not a financial reward. It's not something where you're doing it sort of to find lost treasure. It's something where you're finding lost historical treasure, and it's becoming part of a historical record in the country, in this case Canada, a bit of the UK, and those materials are going to be excavated or highlighted over many, many years to come, and then sort of revealed to the world in various stages. So that's the main goal of these projects. Is that about right?
Yeah.
Fantastic. All right, let's go to Miss Ross's class. Come on back. Go for it. Hey, man.
Have you done any other shipwreck reports?
Yeah.
At that point, I hadn't.
Okay.
But what finding the Nova Zembla made me realize was all these logbooks I've been looking at to look at climate change for so long also hold clues about other whaling archaeology in the Arctic that nobody has looked at yet. So I've been going back through these and have found clues to the locations of other wrecks, to graves of the sailors that died when they were out whaling, graffiti, which was kind of weird, on harbors that they went in. So now this is expanded, and I want to go back and, find it all and record it, because it's in danger of being lost before it's recorded. So with the changing climate there, most of these sites are coastal, and with retreating sea ice, you get more open water. With more open water, you get more storms, and the storms could wash us away before we've had a chance to record it. So hopefully we'll get back up there.
I sure hope so, and we look very forward to hearing about all the expeditions that you do. It's really, really exciting stuff. What a cool opportunity to be able to sift through the historical record to find, again, historical treasures. That's the coolest job. If you ever want to trade, just let me know. Miss Breaks class, I know you guys have asked a couple questions in the chat bar, but come on in and tell us in person.
So my friend Daniel has a question. How did you deal with the cold?
So the first year I was very underprepared. So it's not as cold as Calgary. So when we go to the Arctic in the summer, it's not as cold as, say, Calgary in the winter, which can get really cold, below -40, which I wasn't used to when I first moved here. But you look out the window and you know it's going to be cold, so you dress appropriately. I was so excited and nervous about going the first year and making sure we had all our equipment. I actually forgot to bring any pants. So the only trousers I had with me were my jeans and my waterproofs, which was a big mistake, and probably one of the reasons why I got hypothermia. But the people that were helping us on the boat from the cruise ship, one of them was a hunter, an Inuk hunter called Ted from Rankin Inlet, who was working for this cruise company. He lives in the Arctic and hunts in the Arctic and is very, experienced there. So he knew, even though it was the middle of the summer and it was probably hovering around 0, so it wasn't particularly cold, but we were exposed and on the ocean, he had his polar bear pants on, which he uses for hunting in the winter. So he's the reason we probably found the ship, because I got so cold to the point where I wasn't really talking anymore. So Ted gave me his polar bear pants and a cup of coffee, and that warmed me up enough to, allow me to look through those binoculars. So then in 2019, I totally overcompensated and brought all my midwinter gear from Calgary and was way too warm. So maybe I'll get it right next time.
Maybe. We hope so. But I think what we should do for the next presentation, we had 7 hours rubber dinghy in this one. You should call the presentation, "I forgot my pants," and see how many people sign up. I think we could test that and see what happens. Just a thought. I think we'll get a lot. Okay. Let's take one last one from Joe. I know we're going a little long, so thank you so much to all our groups for sticking around. Joe, if you have one more question for us, go for it.
Do you think you're going to find a certain amount of ships by 2022?
So I have lots of ideas of ships I want to go find, and lots of clues from the history, but it's quite an undertaking to go and find these. You know, you have to arrange a boat, etc. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of money usually as well. But I have two plans for 2022. One, we need to go back to where the Nova Zembla is to look at the wreck of the Eagle some more. And what we think, the reason we think the Eagle's not really there anymore is because it's been salvaged by this Inuit community that used to live on the island. We think their summer settlement, so where they lived in the summer on this island, will incorporate bits of shipwreck from the Eagle. I think they were taking it and using it either for firewood, to make tools, to build structures or tent frames. So that's what we're going to go look for there. On the way, I want to go the long way around. So I want to start in Greenland, go up the west coast of Greenland, along the top and down Baffin Island, because I want to go look for the wreck of the Windward, which was the third ship the captain of the Nova Zembla sank. But also that famous ship that Peary used in his North Pole expedition. And I also have some pretty good historical evidence as to where that is. So maybe 2 in 2022? Who knows?
Very cool. How neat is that? This has been so much fun. We've got classes coming to the end of their period. So Matt, what I want to do now is just bring up for everyone again, the Arctic Institute of North America. Matt's joining us live in Calgary right now. They're an amazing organization doing some really cool work to highlight Arctic research, exploration, support it with some amazing research facilities. So check them out. Come back for our Arctic Institute series over the next few months. We were really looking forward to having a chat from Pond Inlet in February now. So that's really exciting and beyond. So hopefully you can tune in. We got classes typing in the chat bar that they're going to look up Erebus and Terra now, so you've inspired some action, Matt, which is awesome. And what I'd love to do now, as you know, is bring in all our classes just to say a big thank you and goodbye. So Miss Ross, Miss Brake, and Joe, you want to join me in saying a big thanks to Matt for joining us today? Thank you so much.